Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. I'm Lauren V. Davis, and on this podcast, I have conversations with guests who share their personal stories, their insights, celebrations, sometimes even the chaos that they've faced while building their authentic and powerful business. Today, my guest is Andy Storch, and we are going to be talking about how Andy became a successful corporate speaker. Andy is a personal friend of mine, but he also amazes me with his ability to command a stage, run a successful business. He hosts one of the best conferences in the talent development industry, and he seemingly does anything he puts his mind to. I wanted to get into that. I wanted to kind of dig in. For example, in the height of launching his book and a Forbes-rated conference in pre-pandemic 2020, Andy was diagnosed with testicular cancer that spread to his stomach and his lymph nodes. That didn't stop him from making significant life changes and continuing to launch his book and generating business even when the best he could do was just use his phone to jump on LinkedIn. While I encourage my friends to become friends with rest and listen to their bodies, Andy is actually an example of someone who leaned into what was right for him, and he has become such a beacon of light for all who know him and every friend that gets the chance to be in the room with him. I'm so happy to have him on the show today. Happy to introduce you to him. And we actually recorded another podcast a long time ago about how he built his conference. So if you like what you heard today, feel free to go back and check out that episode. P.S. If you hear something you like on this podcast today, will you let me and Andy know? You can text me, DM me, email me. You can find me everywhere as L Davis Creative if we are not already connected. And sharing this podcast episode with someone else you know is a huge bonus to me because my podcast grows with people like you doing things like that. So if you know someone who would like this, please share it with them online, send it to them. Every single time you do this, it really does make a difference to me. All right, Andy is ready to share some insights, actionable tips, and real-world examples on how he created a business that makes him money, but also truly makes him happy. My guest today, Andy Storch, is an author, keynote speaker, podcaster, and community builder. Andy is the author of the book Own Your Career, Own Your Life, which is designed to help corporate professionals stop drifting and take control of their futures. He regularly speaks inside organizations to teach and inspire employees to create their own careers. Andy is also the founder and host of the Talent Development Think Tank Conference and membership community. Finally, Andy is a husband, father, and a friend on a mission to get the most out of life and inspire others to do the same. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Andy. I'm so happy that you're here on the Real Personal Branding Podcast.
Hey, Lauren. I am so excited to be here talking with you. I know you're nervous, but this is going to be great. I'm really excited to be talking with you, Lauren.
We were just talking before we pressed record about how I get weird, I get nerves before I interview some of my closest friends, and I'm not sure why, but I think it has something to do with I have too much context about your life and about what you have done in your life and all the things you've done personally, professionally. And so I'm always afraid that I'm going to not ask the right questions, or I'm going to ask questions based on things I already know and not give the best interview. And that's silly. But I think it's good to note that everyone has imposter syndrome and everyone thinks about these things. But for some reason, I get it in front of my friends more than I get it in front of people who aren't super close to me.
I think, I feel that too. We were talking about that, and I'm sure other people can relate to that because I think sometimes we feel like there's more at stake, right? When we're like, okay, I want to impress my friends or show them I know what I'm talking about, or, I don't want to waste their time, or, whatever the fear is, even though, I'm just happy just being around you and talking to you, and we know we're going to have a good conversation. I also want to say, just to affirm you, because you said one of my closest friends, that you are one of my closest friends, Lauren. And, we both have big networks. I know a lot of people. But if I were to make a list of the top 10 or top 7 or whatever people that I just want to hang out with, or I would call if I have a real problem in my life, you would be at the top of that list. You'd be on that list, Lauren, because you are such a loving, caring, trustworthy, wonderful person. You approach every situation with no judgment, unless someone's just being a jerk to you and we're sitting around talking about the people that are jerks to us. But you approach situations with people with no judgment, so much care, so much love, so much curiosity. We've had so many great conversations over the years since we met 5-6 years ago, and you've got just a brilliant business mind as well. Every time we sit down and just talk, I come away with ideas, things that I want to do, or more clarity in how I should approach things. And so for people that listen to your podcast, if you are listening, you're a regular listener, maybe you already know this, but you get access to, I mean, she interviews some great people, but such a brilliant business mind and just a wonderful, caring person who can be vulnerable and share authentically. And so I love being around you, Lauren. I love talking with you, and I'm just happy to be here. So let's go.
Geez, Andy. I'm gonna cry. Thank you. That is so nice. And like, I feel the same way about you. I feel like if we were having a conversation right now over a glass of wine or something, or over a coffee, which we have done several times, this conversation would be, I think, exactly how we are going to have it today. And just, that's what I love about you, though, is that you are just so genuine and so giving with information. You are one of those people that I consider in my life like somebody who others can strive to be like, because you don't gatekeep information from people. You don't gatekeep tips to how you've built your own success. You are always there uplifting people and encouraging people. And to anyone who thinks like, who is this guy? Is this fake? Is this all
this real?
Is this all a ruse? Like, this is genuinely who Andy is. I wake up to a text maybe once a week with like some words of encouragement in it. And I just can't say enough about how great of a friend you are to me. And thank you so much for saying that. That really, sometimes you just really need that. And I'm glad that if we were on MySpace, I would be in your top 8.
Oh yeah, you would. All right, now we've said all that. We better deliver something for people here, right?
They're gonna be like, what are you guys gonna talk about? Some business stuff here. Okay. Yeah. So the first question I ask on my podcast is, how are you doing for real? It is the Real Personal Branding podcast, after all.
Oh, I like that. I was just listening to some other podcast about this, and everybody says good, great, fine, of course, and I say that a lot. I'm a chronic's not is that the right word? I'm just like, me, I'm like very positive all the time, optimistic. I always try to see the positive side of everything, but I still have bad and hard days, but I'm feeling really good right now. I feel like last week, so you and I are recording this, we're in the second week of January, and I'm just, this is a feeling that maybe a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to, especially parents. I took like 3 weeks off, around the holidays, and it's kind of like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I can take off as much time as I want, right? And I want to be with my family. And then like, I do all this goal setting stuff. And then the new year starts. It's like January 1st, 2nd. And I'm like, oh, I set all these goals. Like, I'm ready to get going. But my kids are still out of school for like 8 more days. And like, they're around the house, and there's like, maybe I should be spending time with them. And so it's sort of like the first week, I'm kind of like, I want to get work done, but I want to hang out with my kids. And like, I kind of felt myself in this like weird zone. And so this week, which started on January 8th or something like that, was like, okay, this is the first real week to get back into work. And so I've gotten some good stuff done this week. I've been productive, not as productive as I would have liked. We always put high standards on ourselves, right? But I also had some good conversations. I had a really great lunch meeting today with a new friend here in Barcelona, which we can talk about. And I get to talk to you. So I am feeling really, really good right now.
So you are really good for real. And I love that. I do love that little nudge to Barcelona right now. You are actually living the dream of so many entrepreneurs. You decided to take your family, move abroad, and start somewhat of a brand new life and a brand new experience through life. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I both have that in common a little bit, right? Because you started a new life in the last couple of years and have started like moving around and live in different places. I think you're in North Carolina right now, and I'm in Barcelona. And this is something I probably dreamed about for close to 15 years since I took my first trip abroad. I grew up in Central Florida. I lived in California for a while and then back to Florida. And I've got a wife and kids. And so I'm not just like this single guy that can do whatever I want. But my wife and I both kind of had this dream of like, it'd be so great to live abroad, especially in Europe. And I think it was one of those things. I think about it this way. We all have dreams and things that we think like, that would be amazing. I'd love to do that. And I think a lot of times we look at, even when we see other people doing it, we think, well, that's cool for them. I could never do something like that, right? I don't know if you've had that experience. Like I've had that experience many times, whether it's becoming a speaker, writing a book, starting a podcast, becoming a senior executive at a company, or moving abroad, or anything else. You could insert anything, becoming a great skier, like whatever it is, right? Where you're like, oh, I'd love to do that, but that's for other people. It's not for me. And so I saw other people having that kind of experience here and there and thought like, that's so cool. I found myself always being really envious. And one day in early January of 2023, I kind of had this epiphany where I was like, maybe we can do that. Maybe we should just, we had a couple of good friends make the move recently, one to Portugal, who I think you know, and another one that moved here to Barcelona. And I started talking to them and like doing some research and thinking like, okay, this is actually something we could do, but would we really do that? And then one day we had this, actually, it was really funny because we're trying to decide between like staying in Orlando, moving to another state, or moving abroad. And we actually put an offer on a house in Orlando, which is my hometown, and we didn't get the house. And that day I was like really frustrated. I was like, you know what, let's just go move overseas. And that was like what decided it. And so we started doing the research, and many months later, by like May, we decided we're going to move to Barcelona. June, we applied for a visa. July, we got approved. In August, we moved. So it happened like fairly quickly. And, my wife was on board. We brought our kids and our dog with us, and we got a lot of help from other people. There was plenty of things to figure out, but it has been a fantastic experience. And I think just getting out of your comfort zone, doing something new is always great. But, just getting to experience a different culture, different place. I had many fears. One of which was, could I keep my business going? And we can talk about the business I've built. Obviously, it's one of the things we'll talk about today. Would I be able to keep that going virtually from here? Would most of my clients in the US say like, oh, you're in Spain, I don't want to work with you. And that hasn't been the case. I've been able to keep the business going. It's been going very well. Been making lots of friends here. It's been a great, it's one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm really happy I did it. And even if for some reason it didn't work out, I knew I'd be happy that I at least gave it a shot. Right. And so one thing I think about is like, if we have these big dreams that we're thinking about and we know it's going to be hard work or it's scary, I consult my older self and like, what, when I'm 80 and I'm looking back on my life, am I going to wish that I had taken the chance and done it? And I think the answer for me was yes, at least give it a shot. And like my business fails and we end up going back to the US with our, proverbial tails tucked between our legs, we'll be glad that we at least gave it a shot, most likely. And just want to note on that too, is I think when we think about these big dreams and stuff and like, oh, what if we fail? Our fear of failing is really our fear of judgment, right? I've learned this from listening to so many other experts. And so we think like, oh, what if I move there and it doesn't work out and I come back? And then my friends are like, oh, see, you try to do this and they're laughing at me, but we know that's not going to happen, right? Like even if people are judging me, they'll probably do it privately. And it won't be, it won't be any of my concern. It'll just be gossip, whatever. But, there's not like, I don't think there is failure in this anyway. We said we'd come for a couple of years and then see where it goes. But there's not really too much to fear other than maybe I run out of money or something. But otherwise, like I'm just so glad I did it. And I would encourage other people to think about what those dreams are that you have and what it would take to follow. What are the risks? And then, think about really, truly giving it a shot.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that. I love those like little pictures I get from you once in a while from a coffee shop. Like, Lauren, the coffee here is like 85 cents. You have to come. You would love this coffee culture.
Shop. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. The bread is great. Coffee shops everywhere. It's awesome.
And for podcast listeners who don't know you yet, I would love to give some background on your story and who you are. So what do you do? Why do you do it? And who do you do it for?
Yeah. So, quick background. I worked in some startups, some corporate jobs that were not very exciting. I got a very lucky break and got into consulting and with a really cool like boutique company for a few years because a friend got me in there, and whole backstory to that. And then eventually got really into personal development and got attracted to entrepreneurship and decided I wanted to build a business of my own. And so I started doing that a few years ago. And in 2020, I published a book called Own Your Career, Own Your Life. And so that was just over 3 years ago. And since then, I've been building a business around that as a speaker and trainer, primarily working with organizations to teach their employees how to own their careers and be more intentional with what they're doing, where they're going, and to prepare for the future. That's a big part of my business. The other part is that I host a podcast and a conference and a membership community for people who work in corporate talent development, or learning and development, as it's often called. So the podcast and the community and the conference are called the Talent Development Think Tank. We've done the conference twice now. You've been to both of them. And I've run a membership community for people that work in talent development to kind of get together on an ongoing basis. And so I get to facilitate that and run that. And I also get to speak in a lot of organizations on career, sometimes leadership as well, but primarily teaching people to own their careers.
I want to talk about today how you built your public speaking career, specifically in a more corporate environment? Because you, like you said, you were in this kind of boutique company. You took that business, you took that role that you had, and you started leaning in towards entrepreneurship and seeing like, oh, I think I would like to be an entrepreneur myself. And from that point to now being a speaker who does get paid to speak to these companies, to their internal groups, there's like some time in between. There's a lot of things that happen and up and down. And even before we press record, also, we were talking about how people always ask you this, and like, it's almost like there's not really a silver bullet.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, like, how do I become a speaker like you? Sorry to interrupt. And I almost hate the question because my answer is not like, oh, here, do these two things. And next week you'll be a paid speaker. It's like, no, here's the 5 years of hard work that I put in to building this. But I do think there is a lot of sort of proven steps that I took that are repeatable by other people. You wouldn't necessarily get the same result, but other people could do, but it's a lot of work, right? It's not just like, here's the magic answer or the silver bullet.
Right. And what I said to you was, when I am listening to a podcast, and maybe this is just me, but I would love to hear from others, like if they feel the same way. When I'm listening to a podcast, I would so much rather hear the story of how someone else did something, not because I'm going to copy it exactly the same way, not because I'm going to do it exactly their way, but I like to hear those stories of how people did the things that they did versus them saying, this is how you do it. Do it this way, and then you'll succeed. Because I just call BS on that. I'm like, no, there's not one way to do this for any single person. There's not some road that you follow and some roadmap, and you follow A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you're there. And because you did all of those steps perfectly, if it worked like that, everyone would be as successful as they wanted to be. And it's not easy. And you went through a lot of stuff in the process of working for a company, starting your own company, and now speaking to big groups of people. And so I kind of wanted to talk through your journey as you have gone from point A to point wherever you are now, probably somewhere way down the alphabet, because you've had a lot of different things go on in your life.
I'm happy to share that. Well, actually, if you want the clear directions on how to build a business as a speaker, you're going to have to buy my course. And so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just joking. I'm joking. You said I'd be open. You already said I'd be open with everything. So I'm happy to do that. And everybody's situation is different, right? And, there's the old sort of phrase from Cars, right? Your mileage may vary, right? You take these lessons and you implement them your way. And I even posted about something this recently, like follow these gurus, people who are sharing knowledge, who have done things, and learn what you can from them, but you still got to implement things your way, do things that fit your strengths, your personality. And it's not necessarily going to turn out the same, right? Like, I don't know. I was just rereading $100 Million Offers this week from Alex Hormozy, and I follow some of his stuff. And but he's a younger guy with no kids. Like, he probably works 7 days a week. Like, I'm not going to have the same lifestyle as him, but I can still learn from him. And I don't have his sales skills. He can tell me all day how to close deals, but like, I'm never going to be able to close deals like that guy does, right? But I can still learn things from him and build a bigger business as a result of those tools that I take away from him, same as anybody else that I follow. Like, I learn things from you all the time. We have very different lives, right? But we're good friends and we have a lot to teach each other. So my experience, I mentioned, so 2016, I'm working for a consulting company. I'm kind of in a position where it's a good company and culture, but I'm not fully enjoying it. I don't feel fully fulfilled. I feel like something's missing for me. I don't know what it is. And I'm starting to listen to these different podcasts and like thinking about like, well, how can I go make a bunch of money so I don't have to work anymore or something like that, right? And I'm listening to a podcast actually, and I stumble on an interview with a guy named Hal Elrod, who wrote a book called The Miracle Morning, who I know you're familiar with. And that was one of those pivotal moments that just changed my life, because I heard that interview and I bought his book and I started practicing the Miracle Morning. And for those not familiar, it's basically the concept is that you start your day an hour earlier than you need to with intention. You start your day intentionally by doing things like meditation, reading, writing, journaling, affirmations, visualization, and exercise. And I had been into health and fitness my whole life, but I had never done any meditation or much journaling. And so I started like really getting intentional with that, meditating, reading a lot more books, listening to a lot more podcasts. And I was listening to all these great podcasts from lots of different sort of gurus that you're familiar with, that you've probably heard, right? And I just really feel this strong pull towards entrepreneurship. And I feel like I want to be running my own business. I don't know why. There's no entrepreneurs in my family. My parents are teachers, come from a sort of a middle-class background. No entrepreneurs that I knew of. I didn't know what that was growing up, but this is something I'm being drawn towards. Even though at the time, I've got a family, I've got one child and another one on the way and a mortgage. And so like, it's not like I'm a 25-year-old kid who can do whatever I want, right? Like there's certainly a level of responsibility and risk there, but I'm feeling really drawn towards this. So I started trying to figure out, how can I build a business, especially around the strengths and skills that I have. Now, I mentioned I was in this consulting company. I have a little bit of advantage in this space in that the company I worked for was all about creating and facilitating these workshops. It was sort of a training company, but in like the consulting space. And so I had gotten a lot of experience getting up in front of a room, facilitating workshops. Now, that's different from keynote speaking, right? Because facilitation is about leading a conversation, but getting the people in the room to do most of the speaking, right? It's not about teaching. It's about pulling the answers out of the people in the room, which I still absolutely love. I love facilitating just as much as I love speaking. Speaking, I see as more teaching, whether it's inspiring or educating or entertaining. You're the one doing more of the talking and, leading more of the conversation, if you will. So I had the experience getting up on stage, and I had I do admit, there are natural skills that we're born with. There are things that we have to learn. And there are some things that I came with naturally. Like, I think I'm fairly good up in front of a room, but I still learned a lot in that job. I got tons of feedback from colleagues and just practice, doing those reps.
I was wondering, when was your first, just hearing all this, when was your first gig that was paid? From this moment to your first gig that was paid, how much time do you think there was? Like
as a speaker? So let's say I started really going down this road starting in 2016. I started my first podcast in 2017. I started my second podcast in 2018. Around 2018, I made a move to a smaller organization that was more entrepreneurial. It was sort of like a run your own business within the umbrella of a bigger business. It was I call it my bridge into entrepreneurship. I was facilitating leadership workshops that were created by other people. And sometime in there, I think 2019, I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me about doing a talk about preparing for the future of work, I think, or no, I was actually owning your career. It was something, it was like kind of the beginning. It was kind of the beginning of what I talk about now. Or I started putting that together based on a request. So I think it was 2019. So we'll call it 3 to 4 years. And then in 2020, I launched a conference from my podcast, which you were at. And we've done an interview on your previous iteration of this podcast about that.
We'll have to link that in the show notes, because that was a great episode.
Because that was how I built my first conference, like from nothing, like a nobody, building a conference, bringing in big keynote speakers,
sold out,
making sure everybody, sold out. It was very successful in that people loved it. Like people said it was the best conference they've ever been to, because we made it very engaging, and it was all about connecting people instead of just like plowing them with information.
And before people think we're crazy, it was 2020 before.
January 2020, right?
January 2020.
Yeah, January 2020. I always have to say January 2020, not just 2020, because people will be like, you didn't host a conference in 2020.
No.
Remember January 2020 when before you knew the world was going to completely change, you're like, life is good. So we hosted this conference, and a lot of people knew about it because I hired Lauren V. Davis to run social media for the conference, and you had it all over you were amazing.
Thank you.
But then the pandemic hit, actually, and we were starting to sell tickets for the next one, and all of that went away, right? We basically shut it down. We couldn't run the conference anymore. At the same time, I was writing my book, which again, Own Your Career, Own Your Life. I'd started writing it in January 2020. And I started writing this book with a clear vision that I want to become a keynote speaker and trainer with my own content based on this book, and I'm going to build a business around it. I know what I want to do with this. I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there. I don't know if it's going to come true or not, but this is what I want to do. And when that pandemic hit, I can tell you, that's where I was like, oh, maybe this dream is not going to come true, because speaking went away, facilitation went away, workshops went away. I don't know if people remember this, but all of that, my entire business dried up and disappeared. All my clients went away. I was facilitating workshops at that time, flying all over the place. And so that was a kind of a time to really pause and pivot and think about what I was going to do going forward. But it gave me more time to work on the book, more time to spend with my family. I left that organization I was with to go completely out on my own at that time. And I really started I was just networking and getting information, sort of telling corporate, contacts what I was working on, what I was doing. And I think the first sort of paid speaking gig that came in from the book essentially was right around the time I published it in November 2020. Someone who had gotten an early copy, just a LinkedIn connection, said, "Hey, we're doing this career week. We would love for you to come speak." And I was like, "Really? That's amazing. That's what I've been trying to get all this time." And that was with a division of the World Bank. So a very legitimate organization. And that was kind of the start, right? And so I started building on that. All the way I was going through some health challenges, which we can go into, but I just kept networking and talking to people. So that was kind of the first one. We'll say that was early 2021 when that came in. So we're talking now 5 years into this journey.
And I just bring that up because I do think it's so easy to think that you can spend a weekend working on your speaking career and reach out to people and then you keep getting no's, or you keep getting turned down, or no one answers your pitches, or whatever it might be. And I just want to put into perspective that it's not worth giving up. If it takes years sometimes to build it to the level that you want. And not only years, but in between your first paid speaking gig and the next big paid speaking gig, you hosted your own conference. You said, "Hey, if I'm not going to be a speaker,
that's right,
I will make myself the speaker of my own conference." And bring in all of these big names. You also wrote a book in between, right? You wrote a book that you could, that was your own content that helped you seal the deal and helped you kind of get the ball rolling and put your face out there and become almost like the nucleus of the influence that you wanted to.
Yeah, look, I mean, I went to a workshop many years ago. I was in this coaching program run by Jarek Robbins, and there was a guy there who said, look, the root of the word authority is author. And he's like, the way that you be seen as like an expert in an area is either you work in that field for 30 years or you publish a book. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so I never said like, oh, I'm just going to publish a book no matter what, even if it's crap. Like I waited for the right idea to come along, made sure I had really good content that I thought would be useful for people, and then started working on this. And so I don't think you have to have a book to become a speaker. I know people who have built careers without it, but it's very, very helpful. It definitely does set you up as a person of authority when you have published a book. Obviously you want it to be good. And I think mine is pretty good just based on the feedback, I've received, but it does create an authority piece. Now, to your point though, it took several years of building this and overcoming challenges. Cause I always remind people of this too, like, let's talk about real life for a second, right? It's great to set a vision. I'm all about setting a clear vision and making a plan and knowing where you want to go and be like, I'm going to go do this thing. There will be challenges that come up. So how are you going to handle this? So I mentioned, I started writing this book in January 2020, setting this goal. 2 months later, the entire world shut down. And I remember, later that year, you remember like end of 2020, beginning of 21, Clubhouse became this like big thing, right? And you and I were like, we were running some rooms together on Clubhouse. And I'm on Clubhouse and I'm going to these rooms for speakers. And they're like, pretending that they're running a room about how to become a speaker, but all the while I can read through the comments and like none of them have any business. Like it's all gone away. Like speaking has been eviscerated by this pandemic. And so I'm like, oh, it's interesting. Like on the one hand, I'm really depressed because I can't achieve this goal that I wanted to right now. On the other hand, I'm kind of on like equal footing with all these experienced speakers because virtual hadn't really taken off quite yet.
Right.
And then
wasn't what it is now, that's for sure.
Wasn't what it is now, right? It's beautiful now. But then in addition to that, as you know, I also got cancer later that year, right? So like right before I published my book, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer and I had surgery 2 days after I published my book. And quite honestly, like, the way I operate, like, I'm not going to get really upset about something, but when I found out that I have cancer, my first reaction was like, this is really annoying. I'm about to publish a book and I'm like, I have all these podcast interviews lined up. Like, what the hell? Like, I have stuff to do. I don't have time for this right now. Like anybody ever has time for cancer. And so I got to deal with that. That was the challenge that I got to deal with. And it turned out, I had surgery and then it turned out the cancer had spread to my stomach and my neck. And so I ended up, not only I took time to do a lot of research and made a lot of changes to my diet and invested in a lot of natural solutions. I did chemotherapy as well. And that took a few months of like not being able to do very much. Like my goal for most days was just to try to walk 10,000 steps if I could, just to get outside and move my body. Otherwise, I know, anyway, like, or 5,000, I don't remember what my goal was, but, and then otherwise I'm like laying on the couch, but I had my iPhone and I'm still posting on LinkedIn and messaging people about my book and things like that. Like it takes a lot of work and time, and there's going to be challenges that come up. By the way, completely healthy today, as you know, and but I kept sort of like forging ahead, like this is going to work out. And it has, because the world sort of got back to normal, actually in a much better way, because now virtual keynotes are a real thing. And I know some people who still do a lot of in-person, because in-person conferences and events are certainly back in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
I do mostly virtual keynotes now. And that is what has allowed me to move my family to Barcelona, because I can live anywhere. I work with global organizations, and they want somebody that can talk. And it's usually around like 11 a.m. Eastern time, which is like the best time to talk to people in California and Europe at the same time. And I can do that. That's 5 p.m. in Barcelona, no problem. And so I get to do a lot of these things. I get to do them virtually. And I built a lot of this around the brand that I built with my book. But, I know you've been talking to people for years about personal brand. It was building that brand, posting on LinkedIn, networking,
Mm-hmm.
connecting with people, overcoming these challenges, continuing to talk to people, listening to feedback. I do a gig, listen to feedback, try to improve, work with an expert like you, who we can get to that as well, to like find ways to improve my presentation as well. Like always trying to get better so that I can keep providing more value and be able to build more of this business. And I'm very lucky. I say I'm lucky. I worked hard to get to where I am, but I'm grateful that I was able to get to the place where I am, where I can say like, oh, I am a paid speaker now. I work with organizations. I get paid to speak about a topic that I'm passionate about, which is owning your career.
I love that. I want to talk about, you said you've mentioned a few times in this interview already that you set a vision and you kind of attack to that vision. When you build a vision into your life, or when you build like this goal into your life, how do you, Andy, go about, setting forth those goals and attacking those goals and attacking those micro goals maybe to get to where you want to be?
Yeah. So it fits nicely into, what I speak about in organizations, but I'm big on owning your career and owning your life. Obviously, it's the title of my book. I think it's really important to set a vision. So too many people are drifting in their career and their life, right? They're just operating in reaction mode. Like, I'll do a good job and like see what comes my way. And many people get lucky. They still get promoted, or they find clients, they build a business. And like, you don't have to be very extremely intentional about where you're going. But a lot of people don't get lucky. They don't have a good boss that brings opportunities to them. They don't have people that recognize their talents or strengths, right? And so I think you do have to be more intentional with what you want to do. It starts with a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness. I think something, you and I have spent a lot of time doing, but most people don't, right? Like, how often do you just sit down with a cup of coffee or tea and a notebook and a pen with no other things to do and no distractions, and just like think about your career and your life? How did you get to where you are today? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Like, honestly, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And I think most people are pretty familiar with their weaknesses, but they're not always honest about their strengths, because we're taught to be so humble. But like, you are good at things. What are the things that people tell you that you're really good at? Like, oh, you're really good at helping coaching people, or getting up in front of a room, or figuring out technical problems, or whatever it is, because those are the things that you probably want to try to embrace and build into a business or your career or a speaking topic or whatever it is. And then what are the energizers, things that you really love doing and you want to try to pursue and do more of? And then what are those things that you dream about that you would love to be doing? Like, are you envious of, like I mentioned, I was envious of people that moved to other countries. I think there's different levels of envy, by the way. Like, no matter what, if you see somebody with like a nice car and a big house, like, you'll probably be envious of them, but you can dig deep down and be like, do I really care about that much? Like, if someone said like, I'll give you this big house if you go work your ass off for the next 10 years. And you're like, well, I don't really care that much. But if you said like, well, someone that's working as a digital nomad, like going around the country or something like you've kind of been over the last few months, you'd be like, well, actually I would work for that because I really want to do that. That's something that I really would love to do. So what's the levels of envy, like the thing that you really like? So for me, it was like, I saw someone with a nice big house. I'd be like, oh, this is cool. I wish I had this, but like, I don't care that much. I see someone living abroad in another country. I'm like, oh man, I'm so jealous. I really want that. That's a sign to me that like, okay, I really want to go do that. I see someone speaking. By the way, another example of that I've been thinking about recently, because, I'm like big into health and fitness and stuff, is like, I hate running, but I love cycling. I don't know why. And so whenever I see somebody going by on a bike, I like, especially like a hardcore cycle, like a group of cyclists, my first thought is, I wish I was with them. Whenever I see people running by, I just think that sucks. I don't want to do that. Right. So,
Yeah.
but that's a sign to me of like, what's even for hobbies, like, what are you drawn towards that makes you interested? So the level of envy, or like when you're jealous of other people. So when you see speakers, like, do you want to do that? Or is there something else that you want to do? That I think that can really inform that vision of what you want to do. And then just to finish up on that, I'll give it back to you, Lauren. I think we should dream big. And then the next step is start getting sort of realistic about it. And don't let your limiting beliefs pull you back. But I could say I want to be a professional athlete. That's not realistic, right? I'm 43 years old. I'm older than almost every professional athlete on the planet at this point. I haven't, I'm an athlete, but I'm never going to be a professional athlete. But I could become a speaker. I could become, something else. So what's like realistic, but maybe out of your comfort zone, but still something that you actually could achieve. And then you start to think about a plan. How would you actually get there?
Yeah, I'm curious to know how you break down your plan. I just wanted to add in a little bit though, when you're having that self-reflection time, when you're thinking about what it is that are your strengths and your weaknesses and where you want to go and what's realistic for you and what you're drawn to, there's a couple things that I wanted to say. And one of them is, when you're thinking of your weaknesses, a lot of times we can point out a lot of the things that we feel are flawed about us. And that's a difference between what you are a little bit more weak at versus what you're more strong at. I am not talking about things that people have said about you that have put you down. Those are not your weaknesses. Think about like, I was told I was too emotional by somebody for a good period of time of my life.
Right.
Me being emotional is actually one of my strengths. It's one of the things that makes me most likable by other people, is that I can feel everything, and I feel everything very deeply. And I love that about myself now.
Yeah.
Now that I'm out of an environment where somebody was telling me that was my weakness.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say, when you're writing down your weaknesses, really think about not what other people are telling you. Think about what you feel is maybe one of your weak points. And that is a part of you that you can improve on. Not necessarily saying like, this is something where I'm inherently flawed. And then the second thing I wanted to share was, when you are figuring out what you're drawn to, it's kind of the same thing goes when you're figuring out like, oh, you see cyclists, you're like, I want to be with them. You see runners, you're like, ew, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I don't want to do that. Okay. So when you're thinking of things that you're drawn to, allow yourself to actually think through what you actually are drawn to, instead of thinking through what you think others want you to do or what you should do based on what something in your life has told you should be doing this, or you should like this because of your strengths, or you should like, I think that if I think I'm good at what I do. I think I love what I do, but I also am like super drawn to like artsy craftsy things. Like I have this dream that I would like to start doing like wood etching. It sounds so silly, but cool. But it's like, I watch those videos on Instagram and TikTok all the time. And if you look at my notebook down here, I have doodles all over it. And I've always been like that, where I'm constantly doodling, because I concentrate when I doodle, and I love creating these like patterns and things. And I'm like, I want to do that, but on wood with a pokey fire stick. I think that sounds way more fun.
Yeah, but that's unique to you. I have no interest in those things.
Right, so exactly. So it's like, and it's like goes for careers, but it goes for hobbies, and it goes for fitness, and it goes for health. And like, the more you feel aligned with yourself in the direction you're going, the less resistance you're going to feel.
Yeah.
So sometimes I ask myself, when I'm like feeling a lot of resistance about something, I'm like, I don't know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now, because I feel way too much resistance to this. And it's not resistance like, oh, this is a challenge, and so I want to back away from it.
I don't want to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's different. Because when you're drawn to something and there's a challenge in front of you, you want to take it on. Cycling is not easy.
No.
But you want to take it on because you like cycling,
Yeah.
So absolutely. That I just wanted to like point those things out, that I think that there's some clarification sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And there could be something I'm glad you brought that up because even like the word weakness, might imply there's something
It's like a
wrong with you or
flaw.
missing or
Yeah,
a
it's
flaw.
not.
Like you said, it's not necessarily the case. Like, and I think, to your point, like there's sort of two sides to every coin. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe a better way to think of it is what are the things that come easy to you that other people struggle with? And what are the
Yeah.
things that you struggle with that you feel like come easy to others?
Yeah.
And so like an example is I'm not very detail oriented. I struggle like spending time, remembering to spend time to prepare for things. I'm often late to meetings. Like these are challenges for me. And some cases I've got to a place where I can sort of outsource or delegate, right? Like I have an assistant who can help me with sort of detailed stuff and remind me of things, but I still have to be on time for meetings, right? So I have to get better at that. I'm not good at like planning things ahead because I don't like to lock in things. So that could be a challenge for me where it's easy for others. But then the flip side is that is like I'm very good at going with the flow,
Yes. Oh
living
my
the
gosh, you
moment.
really
Like,
are.
yeah,
I've
like
seen it. Yeah.
if I'm running a conference and like something breaks or like the agenda has to completely change, I'm like, okay, cool, this is what we're doing now. Like I don't have a problem with it. Whereas other
Yeah.
people would have like a mental breakdown
Right.
if their plan changes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we're all wired differently, and I think we need to recognize how that works and hopefully design a career and experiences that align more with the way we like to operate.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay,
Yeah.
so how do you lay out your goals? Like how did you lay out your goals to becoming a corporate public speaker?
Yeah, well, I think once you have the vision, it's important to find out like how do you do that? And so you want to find the people, if possible, that have done it. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. Maybe you can
Mm-hmm.
ask for some of their time and ask them questions, or maybe you can just listen to a podcast like this, right? Or read
Mm-hmm.
a book. I've got some stories and tidbits in my book, and maybe there'll be another one later on, right? Maybe they have a coaching or mastermind program you can join. So I figured out, okay, like who's doing this, how are they doing it? And started listening to podcasts, reading books, talking to people, looking at what they're doing, how they're doing it, asking lots of questions. And then I was in a program. I hired a sales coach, if you will, a woman named Jessica Lorimore in the UK, and like followed a lot of her teachings on how to build relationships in corporate environments so that I can
Mm-hmm.
sell keynotes to those businesses. And then I had to sort of like just keep moving forward at a little bit on faith, even though part of the time I didn't really believe in myself, because we also have to get past the call it imposter syndrome or limiting beliefs where we're like, oh, I have this dream that I want to do this thing. I'd love to be a speaker, but who would really pay me to speak? If you're
Mm-hmm.
listening to this, you've probably had that thought, like I certainly did. And then being able to say like, okay, I'm going to tell them that I'm going to charge this amount of money to do this thing. And then when they say yes, go, oh my God, they're really going to pay me to speak. I hope it's worth it. And
Yeah.
but then do it. And if it goes pretty well, okay, maybe I am bringing value and like, let me learn from this and keep getting better and better and better. But learn from the people that are doing it. And I mentioned, by the way, I go to an expert on selling into companies because I think there's an interesting delineation here. There are lots of people out there who are speaking and who are speakers or call themselves speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them speak at conferences, right? You and I have both spoken at conferences and we go to conferences. And it's great to speak at a conference. I think it's a great ego boost. You can make connections. If you have programs to sell, maybe you can sell that. Most conferences don't pay anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't worry about speaking at conferences. I try to speak in companies because they pay money. And
Yes.
I like making money. Let's be honest, right? This is not all just about impact. And so I like working with companies because they pay for the talks that, the value that you bring. And so I also am having lots of conversations with organizations, people in organizations, and finding out what's going on, what are they struggling with, what do they need help with, so I can figure out what would bring value to them in the form of a keynote or a training or anything else, and not just trying to force whatever I like or I have on them, but give them something that brings value. And sometimes that actually forces us to create new things that we didn't even think we were maybe capable of. I did some research and I realized like, oh, I'm having conversations all the time. I know about the latest work trends. I know what's going on. Let me put a
Mm-hmm.
presentation based on this. I used AI as well. Like I asked ChatGPT, like, hey, what would you do if,
Yeah.
and then I put a presentation together and it went really well. And I thought, oh, now I have this other keynote that I could give. I could potentially market to clients that are looking for this sort of thing. And that actually came from fielding a request, having a conversation with a client, getting a request, and then being willing to get out of my comfort zone and try something new,
Mm-hmm.
and looking for ways to provide value and not just try to force whatever I want to do on them. So it's having lots of conversations, but also like seeing what other people are doing. And then, okay, what are the steps I'm going to need to take? I want to get this book out. I want to talk to, say 10 or 20 potential clients a week. I want to put I need to put an overview, a 1-page sheet or whatever, a speaker page together. I want to have a website. What are the other things that I need to have in place? And maybe a speaker reel if I have some content from the past, right? What are the things that are going to get me to a place where I seem like a legitimate speaker that are going to get me those speaker gigs? And then I can set goals or milestones and even create habits that are going to allow me to build that business and achieve that vision.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of bring it back to that, the client side and having those relationships with clients that are bringing you in to speak, I know that how you engage with both the audience, but also with the person who is hiring you or the company that is hiring you, it can be incredibly impactful for being invited back, for being referred out to other companies, for the surveys afterwards that people have to fill out about what they just saw, about what they just experienced with the speakers that they've seen. I would love to ask from a speaker's perspective, and then maybe you can also answer from an organizer's perspective. Are there any things that you do as a speaker to engage with the organizer or your company contact that ensure that you get either invited back or that you get positive feedback or that you're referred for your next gig? Because we talk a lot about how a lot of times the person that has something to do with your next professional speaking engagement is probably sitting in the room somehow. Or they might not be the person that hires you for the next one, but they might be the person who refers you or who calls or texts their friend and says, you got to have this person. So tell me a little bit more about anything that you do to engage and ensure that you get invited back or that you get referred.
Yeah, 100%. So a couple things. One is like, I always, if someone reaches out and they're interested in hiring me to speak, or I've reached out to them when we have a conversation, I'm going to learn as much as I can about the need and what they're trying to accomplish, what their objectives are, and how my talk might fit into that and help them achieve those objectives. And I take notes. And then I always include in my proposal to them that it includes at least one prep call before the keynote. And whenever I do that, because I'm working mostly with organizations, right? Whenever I do that prep call with them, it's usually a week before, a few days before, I always ask, hey, besides like, what's the event and what are you trying to accomplish? But hey, what's going on in the organization right now? Describe the culture to me. Let me know like how people are feeling. What are people doing? What are your objectives for this? What would be a win for this? Is it like, sometimes it's like, we want to try to get people to use our internal platform more, or there's this thing going on in the organization. We want people we want to create more talent mobility, people moving around different jobs, that sort of thing. And I can take that. And honestly, I can take my standard keynote that's like 45 minutes to an hour, and I can tweak just one tiny part of it and just give a little call out to whatever's going on in the organization. This is 30 seconds out of the 45 minutes. And they will feel like I created this for them, right? I care about them. I listen to them. This is really important. Sometimes it might be more. I did one a few months ago in October where they were really big on getting more people to use their new internal platform for more talent mobility, their mentor program, stuff like that. So I took screenshots of they sent to me of what their internal program was. I put it into my presentation. I mentioned it several times throughout. And afterward, my client was gushing about how much I listened to them and really created something that was just for them and how much they loved it and how it was the highest rated of all the things that they did. And it was because I took the time to listen, right, and put this in. The other thing I'll say was that I hired an expert, Lauren Davis, to help me improve my presentation and my slides. You did. And we made them, more attractive and sort of more engaging, or wanting for people to want to engage more. I will say that a result of that, first of all, one result of that is that I've had way more people kind of follow me on social media and go sign up for my email list and stuff than ever before because of what you created. The other funny thing is that you made a comment to me when we were working together that I sort of took at the time as like, ooh, maybe it's something I need to change. But now I almost think it's like an asset, where I think you said, you have more slides in your presentation than anyone I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know, I try to pack in too much information to what I'm doing. I know it's probably too much. And I did cut some back since then, But I've actually kind of realized since I'm doing mostly virtual that I think virtual is very different from in person. And when you're
Definitely.
speaking virtually, it's harder to keep people's attention and engage them. So I do a lot of things to try to engage the audience by asking questions, polling them. But I
Mm-hmm.
also think that in the spirit of like webinars, we've all attended webinars, right? Having lots of slides, which means like things are moving all the time. People feel like they need to be paying attention rather than like, oh, I can tune out. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it's actually not that bad in a virtual environment to have 50 slides in an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even 60 slides an hour. You're like going boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And then saying like, if you want more, like go sign up for this bonus thing and you can download it and then you can review it later. But right now I just want to hit you with a lot of stuff and give you some things to think about versus like in person. I think you'd want to like maybe take more time to tell a story and like really engage the audience more like eye to eye, where you don't necessarily have that benefit virtually. And so I've started to think about the delineation between those two. And then it's
Yeah.
actually good to just like almost overwhelm people with information in virtual and then slow down more when you're doing it in person.
Yeah, I think it definitely like depends on your speaking style and your topic, which also makes me have, want to ask the question. A lot of the people that I work with are in that more marketing space or like that conference space where maybe they're not getting paid to speak, maybe they're not
Yeah.
getting, or they're getting paid a little bit, but not, not a ton. And they want to make speaking more of an income stream for themselves. And
Mm,
they're kind of leaning more towards speaking to more corporate audiences. And I
yeah.
guess one of the questions that I hear a lot, and one of the things I work with them a lot on is how do you pick a topic if you've never really spoken to corporate before? How do you
Mm,
identify what those topics are if you have not been in that environment? Because there is plenty of expertise from outside of
yeah.
the industry that you're in that can
Yep.
be extremely useful and extremely engaging.
Yeah. So if I'm looking to make that pivot, I would say a couple things. One, you can do more passive research on like sort of reading the latest, studies from McKinsey and other outlets on work trends and like what's going on, why are people leaving or joining organizations and things like that? What's hot? Wellness is becoming a big thing or not as big, or, are there layoffs or is there hiring problems or this and that? But more importantly, what's been beneficial for me, as I mentioned before, is having lots of conversations with people in organizations. So I would start working your network. Think about, if you have an idea of what you might want to talk about, or at least the realm, whether it's like DEI or wellness or career development or recruiting or whatever it is, and then like start talking to the people that are involved in those things in organizations and find out like what are they struggling with, what have they implemented so far, if they were to bring in an outside speaker, what would they want that person to be talking about? And then
Mm-hmm.
think about how that plays to your strengths or what you've been talking about maybe in conferences and other things. And you can start to put together a talk based on that and come back and say like, hey, I have this talk actually. I think it'd be really valuable for, your people. Can we give this a shot? You might be doing it for free or really cheap to start, to get sort of proof of concept. But I would start by, doing some research, but also having lots of conversations to find out like what's really happening in organizations. You could also talk to other speakers and consultants who are working in organizations and find out, what they're hearing and seeing. Obviously, you got to find the ones who are more open and sort of abundant minded, like you and I, are like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
care. I'll tell anybody anything. I don't feel like I'm competing with anybody. But some people might be more protective of,
Yeah.
their whatever they're finding out.
This is such great stuff. Thank you so much for just sharing so openly about your own journey and your own story and how you have kind of built your own path within speaking. I am curious, and I want to kind of talk about this for a little bit. How important do you think building your personal brand is
Hmm.
within all of this? Because we've been talking about how you kind of work through your goals, how you create this vision. We've talked about how you built a conference and how you invited these amazing speakers to come speak, how it ended up being sold out, and how viral that conference kind of became inside your industry. We've talked about how you've been creating these connections and building this network among people within your space that hire you. But
Mm-hmm.
all of those things don't necessarily become like, all of those things are results of
Yeah.
having a clear and strong personal brand, in my opinion, whether or
Yeah.
not you realize that it's from building your personal brand in the process. And so
Yeah.
I want to kind of hear from you. Is it intentional? that you've
Yeah.
built this personal brand. What kind of things do you do to stay relevant and stay in the forefront? And tell me a little bit more about your personal branding journey.
Yeah. I've definitely been intentional with building my personal brand. I would say at the very least since November 2018, when you and I met at the Upreneur conference in London, right? Which is the conference run by Chris Tucker, which is all about the personal branding, right? And even before that, I was kind of into that idea. And I'm like, okay, this like concept of building a personal brand is like making people aware of who you are and what you do and what you're good at. And so I would say since then, you and I met at that conference and we heard some great speakers. We learned some stuff. We connected with a lot of other people who are doing similar things. We probably both walked in a room thinking like, oh, I don't belong here. All these people like know so much more than me, which wasn't the case. And we've seen everybody else kind of struggling and also building some cool stuff. And as we've been building cool things. And so I've been intentional since then. And I think there's important things to know about building a personal brand, especially regarding corporate. You don't need tens or hundreds of thousands of followers. You certainly don't need a lot of followers on LinkedIn, on Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. Like it's cool to go build stuff there, but LinkedIn is where it's at, like by far for sure, right? Corporate audience. So that's where I try to spend most of my time. Instagram's kind of my vice. I'm on there every day because I get sucked into it. But
Instagram is the one you like, and LinkedIn is functional for you.
But LinkedIn is where I need to be, right? And so, and you don't need you don't need a ton of followers. Like it's about being very intentional with like, who are you connecting with and the type of content that you're creating. And so I've been creating content pretty consistently on there for several years. The last few years have been, around my book and this concept of career development, but also many other things as well. And that slowly builds the brand, but also connecting with lots of people who are my ideal clients or work in that space so that I can have conversations with them. And, the first couple of years of speaking gigs and any type of this stuff, like 21, 22, almost everything was outbound, like me hustling and reaching out to people and building connections and like talking to them about what they're working on and saying like, hey, I can bring value by doing this, right? Over the last year or so, I've started to get more inbound requests from people finding me mostly through LinkedIn, but sometimes people just Google the topic and find my website. And so I'm trying to get better now at improving like SEO and things. Like I've talked to you, you've given me some great advice. I've worked with our friend Pete Everett, who's an SEO expert, and like, he's given some, done an evaluation and said like, here's the things you can improve. But by and far, like it's relationships.
I think that something that you do really well, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, or if you're just born like this, but or if you've worked on this, I've noticed there's a lot of people who give with the hope or expectation that they will get in return. And you seem to give without the expectation of, you just give, you just keep giving and you keep giving. And you don't do it to an unhealthy point for yourself, but you give as much as you can within your boundaries. And you don't expect anything in return. And because of that, it seems like you are open to the opportunities that come up. You just look at everything with an open eye and say, is this for me? No. Okay. I'll pass this on to somebody who it is for with no expectation. Is this for me? Yes. Great. I'm going to do this and I'm going to make this successful for me. And I hope that I can just reflect that back to you, because I do think that there is something to be said about giving without the idea of receiving something. And
100%. I try to live. I don't know where I learned this from, some other mentor years ago, but I really try to live by the philosophy of consistently giving with no expectations. It's not a zero-sum game, or like you have to be paid back for things. If you ever give or do anything with expectations of other people, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Like all disappointment is rooted in missed expectations, right? You can't be disappointed if you don't have expectations, right?
Right.
And so I give with no expectations because I believe that the world is abundant, and I believe in karma, and call it whatever you will, and that it's going to come back to me. Like I do you a favor. I don't expect anything from you, but then our friend Bob like does me a favor, right? Out of the blue, right? It's amazing how that happens. And I tell people that, like, a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I want to publish a book, right? Like, how did you do it? And I tell them how I published my book. And I say, look, a lot of people came out and helped me when I did my book launch and left reviews and supported me. You were one of them, Lauren. And I said, I think a big reason why that happened is because I've always been going out of my way to help other people with no expectations. And so it's easy for them to want to come help me. So you can think about it like building up a karma bank. I don't think about it as anything other than I'm just going to keep helping people. And hopefully, something good will come my way. And I think that it normally does. That said, like you said, I think you even said in there, like, you don't do it to like an unhealthy point or something. Like
Right.
we do have to run a business, run a life, have boundaries.
Yes.
We've all heard stories or met people or had our own experience where we've given too much and you make no time for yourself, right? That's not really healthy either. We do have to make money. And so I have people that reach out and say, hey, can I pick your brain? Or even companies that will say, hey, can you come speak? And I'm like, and I can sense that they actually don't have a budget. I'm like, do you have a budget? And they're like, oh no, we don't pay our speakers. And then I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm not going to work with you because I have a value for what I provide is valuable and I need to be compensated for it. And so we need to have some boundaries around that. But I'm always like looking to help my friends and people in my network and do nice things for people.
Yeah.
In, building up that, whatever karma and like not hoping, just knowing that things will come back my way, but don't go too far because like I said, you do need to make time for yourself, like get paid for what you're doing and make money in business.
Do you feel like that is one of your values in your personal brand or in life?
Yeah, I do think so. I've made a list so I do like a separate kind of workshop or like a section in my keynotes or training sometimes on building your personal brand. And so I always encourage people to like think about like, what are the words that you want to be known for, the things you want to be known for. And so I've made a list of the things that I like to be known for, and giving and generous is certainly in there. And there's different types of being giving and generous. Like some people are like give a lot of their time or money to charity, to nonprofit. I think I guess I give a lot to other people and I don't even really think about it, but so many people like you have given me that compliment that I think, okay, I can build that in. I know that is part of my brand.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. Like I want to be seen as someone who is kind and helpful to others because I think it makes them want to help me, right? And not even doing it for that, but it definitely comes in handy, right?
Right. Well, thank you so much, Andy. I think this was such great information. You've shared a lot of tidbits, like even just, how different it is speaking from B2C to B2B, especially, I guess, the way that you have talked about this today reminds me and it solidifies the idea that things do take time to create and life happens in between. And that sometimes people have jobs at the same time and sometimes people don't. Sometimes they're entrepreneurs, and the day that you plant the seed isn't the day you eat the fruit, that kind of old adage.
Yep.
And I think it's just a great reminder because I see so many people trying to change course and trying to maybe change niches or change verticals or change industries and just giving up so soon because they feel that they're not good at it, or if they were good at it, they would have made it by now, or they would have had some realization, or someone would have hired them. And I feel like if they just stick it out for like a little bit longer, opportunities will come. And I should record a whole podcast episode about this, but I'll end with this thought that for the last year or so, the first year after my divorce, I kind of like allowed myself to just pare down and be in maintenance mode. But the last year I've created a system for myself, an internal system in my head for myself, that instead of manifesting specific goals or specific opportunities, I am manifesting and asking for all opportunities. Any opportunity the universe wants to put in my way, I am happy for it. Bring it to me, because I want the ability where I have never had the ability before. I want the ability to say an emphatic yes or no, not based on the opinion or control or ideas of anyone else. I just want to be able to make that decision, yes or no, this is for me, this is not for me, based on my own self. And so I think leaning into what you would like for yourself, leaning into who you are and what your personal brand is, oh my gosh, it is the best thing ever. And it has presented me with so many things I would have never thought about, or I would have never even dreamt were possible for me.
Yeah, I agree completely. I've watched you on the journey over the last couple of years, and you've been through some hard times, but you kept going. and sharing with friends and getting support. Like, ask for help is so important. It's so hard sometimes for us, especially when you're struggling and things not going the way you want, to be able to just open up to people, for good friends and be like, hey, I had this dream and then this happened and this is not going the way and I don't feel good. I don't really feel like working on this today.
Yeah.
And that's someone say like, hey, that's okay. Can you just send this one email and like, just keep this going a little bit while you also take time for yourself. The other thing you made me think of, I just want to mention as we close this up, because it's like we set the dream, it's going to take longer, everybody's in a different situation, is that we all also get sucked into comparison as well. If you're on social media,
Totally.
You see all these people who are, speakers and coaches and everything else. And it just seems like everybody else has it figured out. Like everybody else is more successful than us. And it's just not true at all. Like, you just don't know what's going on in other people's lives. You don't know what challenges they're dealing with. You don't know what's actually happening in their business. Followers do not equal revenue.
Right.
You don't know how much money they're actually making. Nobody ever talks about that, like how much money they're actually making, what's actually happening in their marriage or their life or like
Right.
whatever. So just keep that in mind and like live your own life, like go on your own journey. We're all on our own journey. If you see people who seem to be doing well and you're following them, ask, what can I learn from them? Can I be inspired by them? And if the answer is no, then unfollow them and just get them out of your feed and go focus on something else.
Great freaking tip. Thank you so much. That was great. I love it. Thank you so much for being here today, Andy. The last question I have for you is, what is one myth about your industry or about professionally speaking in corporate that you just want to bust? It's something that people think that maybe not to be true, or it's something you always hear people say that you're like, I just need to set the record straight here.
I think there's a myth that you look at people that are doing well, that they just like somehow were born that way, or they just got really lucky, or that they, just have this brand and they're just like money flows to them. And it's not true. Almost everybody you follow who's been very successful has probably worked their ass off and gone through some really hard stuff to get there. Even like big names like Brene Brown and Simon Sinek and Adam Grant, those are probably like 3 of the top 5, like when it comes to, speaking fees in the game right now that I think about. And I always look to those people and see what they're doing. Like, they've worked their ass off. They've published books. They've gone through tons of editing and feedback. And like, they've probably had some really hard times. Their life is not perfect. And if they can do it, then like, maybe I won't ever be as big as Simon Sinek or Adam Grant. That's fine. But I know I can also build a business and a career doing it too. And it's just going to take work. And, it hasn't really been that easy for a lot of people. So just get it out of your head and realize that it's going to take work and everybody's path is different.
Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate your time here today. Thanks for being on the Real Personal Branding Podcast.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Real Personal Branding Podcast with my guest, Andy Storch. Here are a couple of the things that I wanted to pull out and highlight for you. 1, it took Andy 3 to 4 years from starting his speaker journey to getting his first paid gig. It took Andy 3 to 4 years from starting his speaking journey to getting his first big paid gig. I just want to pull that out because a lot of people get discouraged when they are pitching or when they are signing up and applying for conferences or reaching out and trying to get those conference gigs that they really, really want and maybe just aren't getting them right away. I just want to put that into perspective that it took him 3 to 4 years. Second, Andy hosts his own conference and he put himself on stage when he wasn't really getting hired as a speaker at the time. He built the most incredible conference. It's so, so good. I've had the pleasure of being at it twice, and everyone walks away from that conference saying, wow, I've never been to a conference like this before. By the way, if you ever want to hear how Andy built that, I have an episode many years back now in my podcast episodes with him talking about how he built that conference. All right, the third thing I want to pull out is that writing a book helped establish Andy's authority and personal brand. He said that was one of the number 1 things that propelled him forward. And number 4, Andy focuses on providing value to potential clients by understanding their needs and objectives. This is the same for any speaking gig. If you're looking to speak more, you have to know what the client's goals and objectives and needs are. He says building relationships and networking consistently over time is absolutely key. What did you think about this episode? I would love to hear from you. Did you like it? Did you love it? I'd love to know what stood out so I can continue bringing content like this to you on this podcast. And P.S., I have a workbook for you about building your speaking business, building your business in speaking. It's only $24. So if anything in this episode interested you today, you can find that in the link in my bio on Instagram or in the show notes of today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the Real Personal Branding podcast. I can't wait for next time.